right. Pepper has his heart.
I found it in that box, the pack box. Hello, internet. Are you ready for more Regency shenanigans?
Always.
Right. So, what has happened? Good gravy.
We had a heavy chapter.
It's a lot happened. A heavy couple of chapters. They went on a picnic, and Mr. Elton and Mrs. Elton were jerks. But then Emma was also kind of a jerk, and Mr. Knightley got mad at her, and now she's dealing with having feelings about it. And she's finally realized that she's been a total bitch to Miss Bates, and she's actually trying to make amends for it, which is nice. Also, mysteriously, Jane Fairfax has suddenly decided to accept a governess position that Mrs. Elton forced on her.
Basically.
Even though she said that she wasn't going to.
Yeah.
So we don't know what's going on in Jane Fairfax's mind. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we shall find out in chapter 45 of Emma. Right, I usually...
I like that.
I was trying to...
Blockbuster caps across the screen.
I gotta say, I liked the new movie, but the fact that the official title of the new movie is Emma, period, is really affected, and I hate it.
It's I read a review that said it reads like a petulant foot stomp. So take that.
Emma.
Take that how you will.
Yeah. I was like, why is there? I just thought it was an affectation of the way they were just styling the text.
Yeah.
But then I saw it's on IMDb as Emma, period, and I'm like, Autumn to Wild, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? It's a good movie. Don't be silly.
Don't try to say you're the definitive Emma. If that is
this is Emma, full stop. I don't think so. That wasn't.
I don't even know what it
because that wasn't the style of the movie. The movie wasn't like this is going to be the definitive, the best adaptation ever of Emma. It was like, let's have fun with it. So I don't know what the period was all about, but
I don't. To point out that it's a period piece.
Oh, you got it. It's a period piece.
We should look for such clues in all movie titles.
Oh man, I can't wait. I'm gonna drop that one on Strangely later. Gonna love it
if he isn't already watching.
I don't think so. And I was just on the phone with him, and he didn't say, "Okay, I'll see you there in the chat. I'm gonna watch it." So I'm assuming he's not gonna plan to be here today. All right. So let's get into it. Chapter 45, XLV, for those of you following along at home. Emma's pensive meditations as she walked home from the Bateses. She was just visiting the Bateses and hearing about Jane. As she walked home, were not interrupted, but on entering the parlor, she found those who must rouse her. Mr. Knightley and Harriet had arrived during her absence and were sitting with her father. Mr. Knightley immediately got up and, in a manner decidedly graver than usual, said, "I would not go away without seeing you, but I have no time to spare and therefore must now be gone directly. I am going to London to spend a few days with John and Isabella. Have you anything to send or say besides the love which nobody carries?"
Wow.
The love which nobody carries? I don't really know what he means by that.
I don't either.
Put love in quotes. Maybe just means that, like, they already have your love. I cannot carry it. Just seems like a weirdly poetic turn of phrase for him.
People always say, they're always telling...
Oh, send my love, and then they don't actually do anything.
Yeah.
Maybe that seems more likely to him.
To say,
oh, by the way.
Yeah, like say hi to so-and-so for me or something, and then when you get there, you don't do it most of the time.
Yeah. Nothing at all. But is not this a sudden scheme? Yes, rather. I have been thinking of it for some little time. Emma was sure he had not forgiven her. He looked unlike himself. Time, however, she thought, would tell him that they ought to be friends again. While he stood, as if meaning to go, but not going, her father began his inquiries. "Well, my dear, and did you get there safely? Then how did you find my worthy old friend and her daughter? I dare say they must have been very much obliged to you for coming.
Dear Emma has been to call on Mrs. and Miss Bates, Mr. Knightley, as I told you before. She is always so attentive to them.
Emma's color was heightened by this unjust praise, and with a smile and shake of the head which spoke much, she looked at Mr. Knightley. It seemed as if there were an instantaneous impression in her favor, as if his eyes received the truth from hers, and all that had passed of good in her feelings were at once caught and honored. He looked at her with a glow of regard. She was warmly gratified, and in another moment still more so, by a little movement of more than common friendliness on his part. He took her hand. Whether she had not herself made the first motion, she could not say. She might, perhaps, have rather offered it. But he took her hand, pressed it, and certainly was on the point of carrying it to his lips, when, from some fancy or other, he suddenly let it go. Why he should feel such a scruple, why he should change his mind when it was all but done, she could not perceive. He would have judged better, she thought, if he had not stopped. The intention, however, was indubitable, and whether it was that his manners had in general so little gallantry, or however else it happened, but she thought nothing became him more. It was with him of so simple, yet so dignified a nature. She could not but recall the attempt with great satisfaction. It spoke such perfect amity. He left them immediately afterwards, gone in a moment. He always moved with the alertness of a mind which could neither be undecided nor dilatory, but now he seemed more sudden than usual in his disappearance. Emma could not regret her having gone to Miss Bates, but she wished she had left her 10 minutes earlier. It would have been a great pleasure to talk over Jane Fairfax's situation with Mr. Knightley. Neither would she regret that he should be going to Brunswick Square, for she knew how much his visit would be enjoyed, but it might have happened at a better time, and to have had longer notice of it would have been pleasanter. They parted thorough friends, however. She could not be deceived as to the meaning of his countenance and his unfinished gallantry. It was all done to assure her that she had fully recovered his good opinion. He had been sitting with them half an hour, she found. It was a pity that she had not come back earlier. In the hope of diverting her father's thoughts from the disagreeableness of Mr. Knightley's going to London, and going so suddenly, and going on horseback, which she knew would be all very bad, Emma communicated her news of Jane Fairfax, and her dependence on the effect was justified. It supplied a very useful check, interested without disturbing him. He had long made up his mind to Jane Fairfax's going out as a governess, and could talk of it cheerfully, but Mr. Knightley's going to London had been an unexpected blow.
I am very glad indeed, my dear, to hear she is to be so comfortably settled. Mrs. Elton is very good-natured and agreeable, and I dare say her acquaintance are just what they ought to be. I hope it is a dry situation, and that her health will be taken good care of. It ought to be a first object, as I am sure poor Miss Taylor's always was with me. You know, my dear, she is going to be to this new lady what Miss Taylor was to us, and I hope she will be better off in one respect, and not be induced to go away after it has been her home so long.
Hopefully she will have the sense to stay put.
Yes.
Makes sense that he would be more accepting of the idea of Jane's going away. He's not particularly attached to Jane being around.
And she's going to be a governess.
He can put it in the sense of, yes, she will be a Miss Taylor, and hopefully she will stay put as Miss Taylor refused to do.
Yes. As Miss Taylor would have been happier. So much happier if she had done.
Poor Miss Taylor.
Poor Miss Taylor.
The following day brought news from Richmond to throw everything else into the background. An express arrived at Randall's to announce the death of Mrs. Churchill. Finally. Sorry. She took her time about it. Sorry. So cold and cruel.
I mean, Mr. Weston kept thinking that there was nothing wrong with her, though.
That's true.
He kept insisting that she was making it all up.
Yeah, that is very true. But Frank, on the other hand, I think was...
No, he definitely was. For reasons.
For reasons. Though her nephew had had no particular reason to hasten back on her account, she had not lived above 36 hours after his return. A sudden seizure of a different nature from anything foreboded by her general state had carried her off after a short struggle. The great Mrs. Churchill was no more. It was felt as such things must be felt. Everybody had a degree of gravity and sorrow, tenderness towards the departed, solicitude for the surviving friends, and in a reasonable time, curiosity to know where she would be buried. Goldsmith tells us that when lovely woman stoops to folly, she has nothing to do but to die. And when she stoops to be disagreeable, it is equally to be recommended as a clearer of ill fame. Mrs. Churchill, after being disliked at least 25 years, was now spoken of with compassionate allowances. In one point, she was fully justified. She had never been admitted before to be seriously ill. The event acquitted her of all the fancifulness and selfishness of imaginary complaints. Poor Mrs. Churchill. Who's talking now?
No clue.
Oh, maybe Mr. Weston? I can't tell. Whose voice am I supposed to be doing? Poor Mrs. Churchill. No doubt she had been suffering a great deal, more than anybody had ever supposed, and continual pain would try her temper. It was a sad event, a great shock with all her faults. But what would Mr. Churchill to do without her? Mr. Churchill's loss will be dreadful indeed. Mr. Churchill would never get over. Oh, this is one of those times when they're kind of she's sort of generally saying these are the sort of things people are saying.
Yeah.
But she puts it in the context of narrative, but puts quotes around it.
Right.
I hate it when she does that. I find it very annoying.
You can't figure out right away who is supposed to be.
Yes. Even Mr. Weston shook his head and looked solemn and said, "Ah, poor woman, who would have thought it?" and resolved that his mourning should be as handsome as possible. And his wife sat sighing and moralizing over her broad hems with a commiseration and good sense, true and steady. How it would affect Frank was among the earliest thoughts of both. It was also a very early speculation with Emma. The character of Mrs. Churchill, the grief of her husband, her mind glanced over them both with awe and compassion, and then rested with lightened feelings on how Frank might be affected by the event, how benefited, how freed. She saw in a moment all the possible good. Now an attachment to Harriet Smith would have nothing to encounter. Mr. Churchill, independent of his wife, was feared by nobody, an easy, guidable man, to be persuaded into anything by his nephew. All that remained to be wished was that the nephew should form the attachment as, with all her goodwill in the cause, Emma could feel no certainty of its being already formed.
Maybe because they have not noticed each other.
And they've barely spoken to each other.
Yeah.
Harriet behaved extremely well on the occasion, with great self-command. Whatever she might feel of brighter hope, she betrayed nothing. Emma was so gratified to observe such a proof in her of strengthened character, and refrained from any illusion that might endanger its maintenance. They spoke, therefore, of Mrs. Churchill's death with mutual forbearance. So convenient that things always happen in a way that Emma is able to justify.
Yes.
Short letters from Frank were received at Randall's, communicating all that was immediately important of their state and plans. Mr. Churchill was better than could be expected, and their first removal, on the departure of the funeral for Yorkshire, was to be to the house of a very old friend in Windsor, to whom Mr. Churchill had been promising a visit for the last 10 years. And was not actually able to make until his wife died.
Wow.
At present, there was...
a lot.
I just have to assume that Mr. Churchill didn't approve of this friend.
Yeah.
At present...
I believe we're meant to.
Yeah. At present, there was nothing to be done for Harriet. Good wishes for the future were all that could yet be possible on Emma's side. It was a more pressing concern to show attention to Jane Fairfax, whose prospects were closing while Harriet's opened, and whose engagements now allowed of no delay in anyone at Highbury who wished to show their kindness, and with Emma it was grown into a first wish. She had scarcely a stronger regret than for her past coldness, and the person whom she had been so many months neglecting was now the very one on whom she would have lavished every distinction of regard or sympathy. She wanted to be of use to her, wanted to show a value for her society, and testify respect and consideration. She resolved to prevail on her to spend a day at Hartfield. A note was written to urge it. The invitation was refused, and by a verbal message, Miss Fairfax was not well enough to write, and when Mr. Perry called at Hartfield the same morning, it appeared that she was so much indisposed as to have been visited, though against her own consent, by himself, and that she was suffering under severe headaches and a nervous fever to a degree which made him doubt the possibility of her going to Mrs. Smallridge's at the time proposed. Her health seemed for the moment completely deranged, appetite quite gone, and though there were no absolutely alarming symptoms, nothing touching the pulmonary complaint, which was the standing apprehension of the family, Mr. Perry was uneasy about her. He thought she had undertaken more than she was equal to, and that she felt it so herself, though she would not own it. Her spirits seemed overcome. Her present home, he could not but observe, was unfavorable to a nervous disorder. Confined always to one room, he could have wished it otherwise. And her good aunt, though his very old friend, he must acknowledge to be not the best companion for an invalid of that description. Her care and attention could not be questioned. They were, in fact, only too great. He very much feared that Miss Fairfax derived more evil than good from them. Emma listened with the warmest concern, grieved for her more and more, and looked around, eager to discover some way of being useful. To take her, be it only an hour or two from her aunt, to give her change of air and scene and quiet, rational conversation, even for an hour or two, might do her good. And the following morning she wrote again to say, in the most feeling language she could command, that she would call for her in the carriage at any hour that Jane would name, mentioning that she had Mr. Perry's decided opinion in favor of such exercise for his patient. The answer was only in this short note. Miss Fairfax's compliments and thanks, but is quite unequal to any exercise. Oh, yeah, as Steve pointed out, it must have been a horrible obstacle to the development of medicine that people had to claim illness anytime they were, like, upset because they weren't allowed to admit to, like, emotional problems.
Right.
No wonder people were so confused about, especially women, I would think, especially with women. You just, you went, I have a headache. Perhaps I've walked too far today. Oh, I have a headache. Perhaps I've been too long indoors. Like, no wonder people were so confused and thought women were just, like, totally irrational and couldn't be understood.
Yeah.
Like,
you couldn't actually say what was going on.
Yeah.
Anything.
You couldn't say I'm having a bad brain day. Or I'm just
say so-and-so is being a douchebag.
Yeah. I'm just a touch brokenhearted. My life has been ruined.
Yeah.
Could you leave me alone a bit?
Yeah.
Very, very astute and thoughtful observation. Emma felt that her own note had deserved something better, but it was impossible to quarrel with words whose tremulous inequality showed indisposition so plainly, and she thought only of how she might best counteract this unwillingness to be seen or assisted. In spite of the answer, therefore, she ordered the carriage, and drove to Mrs. Bates's in the hope that Jane would be induced to join her, but it would not do. Miss Bates came to the carriage door, all gratitude, and agreeing with her most earnestly in thinking an airing might be of greatest service, and everything that message could do was tried, but all in vain. Miss Bates was obliged to return without success. Jane was quite unpersuadable. The mere proposal of going out seemed to make her worse. Emma wished she could have seen her and tried her own powers, but almost before she could hint the wish, Miss Bates made it appear that she had promised her niece on no account to let Miss Woodhouse in. Indeed, the truth was that her poor dear Jane could not bear to see anybody at all. Mrs. Elton, indeed, could not be denied, and Mrs. Cole had made such a point, and Mrs. Perry had said so much, but except then, Jane would really see nobody.
Wow.
That's actually pretty bad.
That is.
I wonder,
like,
is that just meant to indicate that, like, Emma's actually the only one who's listening to Jane's wishes? Or is it to indicate that Jane particularly doesn't want to see Emma? I don't know why that would be, though.
Well, I mean, Emma's never been particularly friendly. Well, she hasn't been unfriendly to
No,
Emma.
no. I don't think so. Unless Jane believes that Frank is interested in
that is possible.
Emma.
That is possible.
That could be.
He's been acting so well, he fooled his girlfriend.
Oh, you just said it.
Oh, right, of course.
You just said it. I mean, it's been pretty. I think it's been pretty obvious the last couple chapters. It's been hard to dance around it, and we haven't been doing a great job. But anyway,
it's hard to dance.
Emma did not want to be classed with the Mrs. Eltons, the Mrs. Perrys, and the Mrs. Coles, who would force themselves anywhere. Neither could she feel any right of preference herself. She submitted, therefore, and only questioned Miss Bates further as to her niece's appetite and diet, which she longed to be able to assist. On that subject, poor Miss Bates was very unhappy and very communicative. Jane would hardly eat anything. Mr. Perry recommended nourishing food, but everything they could command, and never had anybody such good neighbors, was distasteful. Emma, on reaching home, called the housekeeper directly to an examination of her stores, and some arrowroot of very superior quality was speedily dispatched to Miss Bates with a most friendly note. In half an hour, the arrowroot was returned, with 1,000 thanks from Miss Bates, but dear Jane would not be satisfied without its being sent back, It was a thing she could not take, and moreover, she insisted on her saying that she was not at all in want of anything. Please leave me alone, Emma.
I know, right?
I mean, at least Emma didn't, force her way in the way. I'm sure Mrs. Elton did.
Yeah.
I don't know about Mrs. Perry and Mrs. Cole. They seem a little more sensible in as much as we know about them. Yeah. But I'm sure Mrs. Elton would be
obviously
the sort to just...
She's the sort of person who, that analogy for consent with, would you force a person to take tea? Like, if you offered someone a cup of tea.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If they said no, would you then, pour it down their throat? Mrs. Elton actually would.
Yeah. She would certainly still serve it to you.
She would be like, no, you'll like it. Like, no, just keep your mouth open here. Yeah, I'll hold it for you.
You will drink this tea, goddammit.
You'll like it, I swear.
Mrs. Elton is tedious. When Emma afterwards heard that Jane Fairfax had been seen wandering about the meadows, at some distance from Highbury, on the afternoon of the very day on which she had, under the plea of being unequal to any exercise, so peremptorily refused to go out with her in the carriage, she could have no doubt, putting everything together, that Jane was resolved to receive no kindness from her. She was sorry, very sorry. Her heart was grieved for a state which seemed but the more pitiable from this sort of irritation of spirits, inconsistency of action, and inequality of powers, and it mortified her that she was given so little credit for proper feeling, or esteemed so little worthy as a friend. But she had the consolation of knowing that her intentions were good, and of being able to say to herself that could Mr. Knightley have been privy to all her attempts of assisting Jane, could he even have seen into her heart, he would not, on this occasion, have found anything to reprove. Mr. Knightley's opinion is always the most important thing.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I given that, I think it is inarguable that is the case, that she just really does not want to see Emma. Although, even aside from Emma and Frank's flirtation or whatever, she might just not want to see Emma because she's about to go off and be a governess and give up her hopes of ever having a better life, an independent life. Yeah. And seeing Emma, who is quite independent, would be kind of painful. Especially when Emma's never been a particular friend to her.
Yeah, I could see that. Emma's never paid her any particular kindness before. She hasn't been mean, but although she was mean to her aunt, but I doubt that is what is bothering.
That's true. It might be partially that too.
Yeah.
I forgot that Jane was there for that.
She might just have a general opinion of Emma as not a friend.
Yeah. Chapter 46. One morning, about 10 days after Mrs. Churchill's decease, Emma was called downstairs to Mr. Weston, who could not stay 5 minutes, but wanted particularly to speak with her. He met her at the parlor door, and hardly asking how she did, in his natural key of his voice, sank it immediately to say, unheard by her father, "Can you come by Randall's at any time this morning? Do, if it be possible. Mrs. Weston wants to see you. She must see you." "Is she unwell?" No, not at all. Only a little agitated. She would have ordered the carriage and come to you, but she must see you alone, and that, nodding towards her father. Can you come? Certainly, this moment, if you please. It is impossible to refuse what you ask in such a way, but what can be the matter? Is she really not ill? Depend upon me, but ask no questions. You will know it all in time. The most unaccountable business, but hush, hush. To guess what all this meant was impossible even for Emma, who is very good at guessing what things mean, whether she's right or not.
Yeah, that is true.
Something really important seemed announced by his looks, but as her friend was well, she endeavored not to be uneasy, and settled it with her father that she would take her walk now. She and Mr. Weston were soon out of the house together, and on their way at a quick pace for Randall's. "Now," said Emma, when they were fairly beyond the sweep gates, "now, Mr. Weston, do let me know what has happened." No, he gravely replied. "Don't ask me. I promised my wife to leave it all to her. She will break it to you better than I can. Do not be patient. Do not be impatient, Emma. It will all come out soon." "Break it to me," cried Emma, standing still with terror. "Good God! Mr. Weston, tell me at once. Something has happened in Brunswick Square. I know it has. Tell me, I charge you. Tell me this moment what it is." "No, indeed, you are mistaken." "Could you get the..."
"Oh, yeah, sure."
Mr. Weston, do not trifle with me. Consider how many of my dearest friends are now in Brunswick Square. Which of them is it? I charge you by all that is sacred, not to attempt concealment.
Upon my word, Emma. Your word, why not your honor? Why not say upon your honor if it has nothing to do with any of them? Good heavens, what can be to be broke to me that does not relate to one of my family? Upon my honor, he said very seriously, it does not. It is not in the smallest degree connected with any human being of the name of Knightley. Emma's courage returned, and she walked on. I was wrong, he continued, in talking of its being broke to you. I should not have used the expression. In fact, it does not concern you. It concerns only myself. That is, we hope. Oh, in short, my dear Emma, there is no occasion to be uneasy about it. I don't say that it is not a disagreeable business, but things might be much worse. If we walk fast, we will be soon at Randall's.
Just shut up, dude.
Just stop talking at this point. Although that is a difficult situation to be in, to be like, look, it's super important, but I can't tell you.
Right.
Because my wife needs to be the one to tell you, but also it's not a good thing. It's not super horrible. It's like, how do you even like, even, I don't know how long exactly. It's clearly a relatively short walk from there to Randall's, but like, you know, not a 1 minute walk, you know.
Yeah, and it is awkward to walk in silence.
Yes. Must have some conversation. Emma found she must wait, and now it required little effort. She asked no more questions, therefore, merely employed her own fancy, and that soon pointed out to her the probability of its being some money concern, something just come to light of a disagreeable nature in the circumstances of the family, something which the late event at Richmond had brought forward. Her fancy was very active, 6 natural children, perhaps, and poor Frank cut off. This, though very undesirable, would be no matter of agony to her. It inspired little more than an animating curiosity. Who is that gentleman on horseback? Said she, as they proceeded, speaking more to assist Mr. Weston in keeping his secret than with any other view. I do not know. One of the Otways. Not Frank. It is not Frank, I assure you. You will not see him. He is halfway to Windsor by this time. Has your son been with you, then? Oh, yes, did not you know? Well, never mind. For a moment he was silent, and then added in a tone much more guarded and demure. Yes, Frank came over this morning just to ask how we did. Flawless lie, he's thinking to himself. Well done, Mr. Weston.
Nailed it off quite well.
They hurried on and were speedily at Randall's. Well, my dear, said he as they entered the room, I have brought her, and now I hope you will soon be better. I shall leave you together. There is no use in delay. I shall not be far off if you want me. And Emma distinctly heard him add in a lower tone before she quitted the room, I have been as good as my word. She has not the least idea. Very, very subtle.
He's so good at the stage whispers.
Mrs. Weston was looking so ill and had an air of so much perturbation that Emma's uneasiness increased, and the moment they were alone, she eagerly said, What is it, my dear friend? Something of a very unpleasant nature, I find, has occurred. Do let me know directly what it is. I have been walking all this way in complete suspense. We both abhor suspense. Do not let mine continue longer. It will do you good to speak of your distress, whatever it may be. Have you indeed no idea? Said Mrs. Weston in a trembling voice. Cannot you, my dear Emma, cannot you form a guess as to what you are to hear? So far as that it relates to Mr. Frank Churchill, I do guess. You are right. It does relate to him, and I will tell you directly. Resuming her work and seeming resolved against looking up. He has been here this very morning on a most extraordinary errand. It is impossible to express our surprise. He came to speak to his father on the subject, to announce an attachment. She stopped to breathe. Emma thought first of herself and then of Harriet. More than an attachment, indeed, resumed Mrs. Weston. An engagement. A positive engagement. What will you say, Emma? What will anybody say when it is known that Frank Churchill and Miss Fairfax are engaged? Nay, that they have been long engaged.
Boom.
Finally, it's out!
Boom!
Whew!
Oh, how shocking.
I mean, honestly, if reading the book for the first time, I really do wonder how much it would be a surprise. Like,
probably the fact that they were engaged would be a surprise.
Oh, yeah, that they've been engaged since whatever. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into it. Emma even jumped with surprise and horror-struck exclaimed, Jane Fairfax, good God, you are not serious. You do not mean it. You may well be amazed, returned Mrs. Weston, still averting her eyes and talking on with eagerness, that Emma might have time to recover. You may well be amazed. But it is even so. There has been a solemn engagement between them ever since October, formed at Weymouth and kept a secret from everybody. Not a creature knowing it but themselves, neither the Campbells, nor her family, nor his. It is so wonderful that, though perfectly convinced of the fact, it is yet almost incredible to myself. I can hardly believe it. I thought I knew him. Emma scarcely heard what was said. Her mind was divided between two ideas, her own former conversation with him about Miss Fairfax, and poor Harriet. And for some time she could only exclaim, and require confirmation, repeated confirmation. Well, said she at last, trying to recover herself, this is a circumstance which I must think of at least half a day before I can at all comprehend it. What? Engaged her all the winter, before either of them came to Highbury? Engaged since October, secretly engaged. It has hurt me, Emma, very much. It has hurt his father equally. Some part of his conduct we cannot excuse. Emma pondered a moment and then replied, I will not pretend not to understand you, and to give you all the relief in my power, be assured that no such effect has followed his attentions to me as you are apprehensive of. Mrs. Weston looked up, afraid to believe, but Emma's countenance was as steady as her words. That you may have less difficulty in believing this boast of my present perfect indifference, she continued, I will further tell you that there was a period in the very early part of our acquaintance when I did like him, when I was very much disposed to be attached to him, nay, was attached, and how it came to cease is perhaps the wonder. Fortunately, however, it did cease. I have really, for some time past, for at least these 3 months, cared nothing about him. You may believe me, Mrs. Weston. This is the simple truth. Mrs. Weston kissed her with tears of joy, and when she could find utterance, assured her that this protestation had done her more good than anything else in the world could do. Mr. Weston will be almost as much relieved as myself, said she. On this point we have been wretched. It was our darling wish that you might be attached to each other, and we were persuaded that it was so. Imagine what we have been feeling on your account. I have escaped, and that I should escape may be a matter of grateful wonder to you and myself. But this does not acquit him, Mrs. Weston, and I must say that I think him greatly to blame. What right has he to come among us with affection and faith engaged, and with manners so very disengaged? What right had he to endeavor to please, as he certainly did, to distinguish any one young woman with persevering attention, as he certainly did, while he really belonged to another? How could he tell what mischief he might be doing? How could he tell that he might not be making me in love with him? Very wrong indeed. Clearly right now she's actually upset on Harriet's behalf.
Yes. Not even thinking about Jane yet, really.
Right, yeah. Well,
or maybe.
It's all such a surprise. I don't think she's had the thought. Well, sure, she had to dissuade Mrs. Weston that she was brokenhearted over the news.
Right.
Now she's being upset on Harriet's behalf.
Yeah.
At some point, she will be able to be happy for Jane.
Yeah.
But right now, they're just, understandably, I think everyone is feeling like, how could they both have lied to us?
Well, that's true. I was thinking sympathy for Jane because Jane watched him flirting with these.
Yeah, sympathy for Jane over what happened over the last handful of months. Also happiness for Jane over what has happened now. I think will come eventually, but right now they're just more upset about being lied to, which is understandable.
That's totally fair.
From something that he said, my dear Emma, I rather imagine. And how could she bear such behavior? Composure with a witness to look on, while repeated attentions were offering to another woman before her face, and not resent it? That is a degree of placidity which I can neither comprehend nor respect.
Now she's like mad at Jane for dealing with it, for being so quiet and taking it so quietly, watching him flirt with someone else.
Yeah,
she's not really thinking clearly yet.
No.
There were misunderstandings between them, Emma. He said so expressly. He had not time to enter into much explanation. He was here only a quarter of an hour, and in a state of agitation which did not allow a full use even of the time he could stay. But that there had been misunderstandings, he decidedly said. The present crisis indeed seemed to be brought on by them, and those misunderstandings might very possibly arise from the impropriety of his conduct. Impropriety? Oh, Mrs. Weston, it is too calm a censure, much, much beyond impropriety. It has sunk him. I cannot say how it has sunk him, in my opinion. So unlike what a man should be. None of that upright integrity, that strict adherence to truth and principle, that disdain of trick and littleness, which a man should display in every transaction of his life. What I mean to say is, he should be exactly like Mr. Knightley. Yes. All men should be exactly like Mr. Knightley. It's obvious.
Yes.
Nay, dear Emma, now I must take his part. For though he has been wrong in this instance, I have known him long enough to answer for his having many, very many good qualities, and— Good God, cried Emma, not attending to her. Mrs. Smallridge, too! Jane actually on the point of going as a governess! What could he mean by such horrible indelicacy? To suffer her to engage herself, to suffer her even to think of such a measure! He knew nothing about it, Emma. On this article I can fully acquit him. It was a private resolution of hers, not communicated to him, or at least not communicated in a way to carry conviction. Till yesterday, I know, he said he was in the dark as to her plans. They burst on him, I do not know how, but by some letter or message, and it was the discovery of what she was doing, of this very project of hers, which determined him to come forward at once, own it all to his uncle, throw himself on his kindness, and, in short, put an end to the miserable state of concealment that had been carrying on so long. Emma began to listen better. I am to hear from him soon, continued Mrs. Weston. He told me at parting that he should soon write, and he spoke in a manner which seemed to promise me many particulars that could not be given now. Let us wait, therefore, for this letter. It may bring many extenuations. It may make many things intelligible and excusable, which now are not to be understood. Don't let us be severe. Don't let us be in a hurry to condemn him. Let us have patience. I must love him, and now that I am satisfied on one point, the one material point, I am sincerely anxious for its all turning out well, and ready to hope that it may. They must both have concealed a great deal of— they must have both have suffered a great deal under such a system of secrecy and concealment. His sufferings, replied Emma dryly, do not appear to have done him much harm. Well, and how did Mr. Churchill take it? Most favourably for his nephew, gave his consent with scarcely a difficulty. Conceive what the events of a week have done in that family. While poor Mrs. Churchill lived, I suppose there could not have been a hope, a chance of possibility. But scarcely are her remains at rest in the family vault than her husband is persuaded to act exactly opposite to what she would have required. What a blessing it is when undue influence does not survive the grave. He gave his consent with very little persuasion. Good thing Mr. Churchill is a complete wuss.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, never stood up to his wife, but also won't stand up for his wife's convictions now that she's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that he won't do the latter, but he might have done the former, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thought Harriet, he would have done as much for Harriet. Thought Emma, he would have done as much for Harriet. I mean, theoretically, probably. But you forget that Frank has never been in love with Harriet, and it's a moot point.
Right, yeah.
This was settled last night, and Frank was off with the light this morning. He stopped at Highbury at the Bateses, I fancy, some time, and then came on hither, but was in such a hurry to get back to his uncle, to whom he is just now more necessary than ever, that as I tell you, he could stay with us but a quarter of an hour. He was very much agitated, very much indeed, to a degree that made him appear quite a different creature from anything I have ever seen him before. In addition to all the rest, which had been such a shock, that there had been the shock of finding her so very unwell, which he had had no previous suspicion of, and there was every appearance of his having been feeling a great deal. And do you really believe the affair to have been carrying on with such perfect secrecy? The Campbells, the Dixons, none of them know of the engagement? Emma could not speak the name of Dixon without a little blush. As well she should.
Yes.
None, not one. He positively said it had been known to no being in the world but their two selves. Well, said Emma. "I suppose we shall gradually grow reconciled to the idea, and I wish them very happy. But I shall always think it a very abominable sort of proceeding. What has it been but a system of hypocrisy and deceit, espionage and treachery, to come among us with professions of openness and simplicity, and such a league in secret to judge us all? Here have we been the whole winter and spring, completely duped, fancying ourselves all on equal footing of truth and honor, with two people in the midst of us who may have been carrying round, comparing and sitting in judgment on sentiments and words that were never meant for both to hear. They must take the consequence if they have heard each other spoken of in a way not perfectly agreeable." "I am quite easy on that head," replied Mrs. Weston. "I am very sure that I never said anything of either to the other which both might not have heard," she said, looking pointedly at Emma, who knows she can't say the same.
Right.
"Well, you are in luck. Your only blunder was confined to my ear when you imagined a certain friend of ours in love with the lady." "True. But as I have always had a thoroughly good opinion of Miss Fairfax, I never could, under any blunder, have spoken ill of her. And as to speaking ill of him, there I must have been safe." At this moment, Mr. Weston appeared at a little distance from the window, evidently on the watch. His wife gave him a look which invited him in, and while he was coming round, added, "Now, dearest Emma, let me entreat you to say and look everything that may set his heart—" Oh, sorry, that's still Mrs. Weston. "Now, dearest Emma, let me entreat you to say and look everything that may set his heart at ease, and incline him to be satisfied with the match. Let us make the best of it. And indeed, almost everything may be fairly said in her favour. It is not a connection to gratify, but if Mr. Churchill does not feel that, why should we? And it may be a very fortunate circumstance for him, for Frank, I mean, that he should have attached himself to a girl of such steadiness of character and good judgment as I have always given her credit for, and still am disposed to give her credit for, in spite of this one great deviation from the strict rule of right. And how much may be said in her situation for even that error?" "Much indeed," cried Emma feelingly. "If a woman can ever be excused for thinking only of herself, it is in a situation like Jane Fairfax's. Of such one may almost say that the world is not theirs, nor the world's law." Which is in quotes, so I assume it is a reference to something.
Yeah.
She met Mr. Weston on his entrance with a smiling countenance, exclaiming, "A pretty trick you have been playing on me, upon my word. This was a device, I suppose, to sport with my curiosity and exercise my talent of guessing. But you really frightened me. I thought you had lost half your property at least. And here, instead of its being a matter of condolence, it turns out to be one of congratulation. I congratulate you, Mr. Weston, with all my heart, on the prospect of having one of the most lovely and accomplished young women in England for your daughter." That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, that is exactly what Mr. Weston would wish to hear.
Yes.
She's lightened the mood and also assured him that she is not in the least upset by the situation.
Yeah.
A glance or two between his wife and him convinced him that all was right as his speech proclaimed, and its happy effect on his spirits was immediate. His air and voice recovered their usual briskness. He shook her heartily and gratefully by the hand, and entered on the subject in a manner to prove he now only wanted time and persuasion to think the engagement no very bad thing. His companion suggested only what could palliate imprudence or smooth objections, and by the time they had talked it all over together, and he had talked it all over again with Emma in their walk back to Hartfield, he was become perfectly reconciled, and not far from thinking it the very best thing that Frank could possibly have done.
Of course.
That is classic Mr. Weston right there. All right, and on that note, we've wrapped up that chapter, and then we shall wrap up today's reading. Tomorrow we will read 47. Boy, there's so much. I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so much left for. That's the really. I mean, there's two big things that happen in this book at the end, right? And that's certainly one of them, but it's like, oh, look how much book there's still left.
Yeah.
We've still got so many chapters to go.
I mean, think about how long it took Lizzie and Darcy to announce their engagement to everybody.
That's a very good point.
How many times Jane and Bingley kept visiting after they were engaged?
That's true. In the miniseries, like, they're engaged, and then Lizzie and Darcy become engaged, and then Lizzie spends a little bit of time convincing people that she and Darcy are engaged and that it's a good thing. And then they're all married and the movie's over. The miniseries is over. But in the book, there's all this going back and forth. She and Darcy don't tell anyone about their being engaged for like several days for some reason. I can't remember.
I don't remember if it was because they didn't want to steal Jane and Bingley's thunder, or I think it was more that they weren't sure.
They weren't sure how to do it. Yeah.
How to make people, especially Elizabeth, didn't know how she would tell people in a way that they would believe.
Yeah. I think that was part of it.
So yeah, they definitely didn't know how.
But yeah, that's a good point. And then even after they get married, there's like another several pages of like, and then this happened and that happened a little. Yeah, almost. Thing. Yeah. So we have more to go. But at any rate, that is the end of our video for today. I will be back tomorrow. I really thought I was going to be done by the end of this week. A couple of weeks ago, I thought the chapters would work out to it would be done by the end of May, but I made a couple more YouTube videos. So we'll see. We'll see how long it takes. But yes, we'll be back tomorrow and then back again on Monday. And on Saturday, I am doing a concert. Fingers crossed it will actually work. Yeah, as you said, Jane Austen doesn't really leave herself threads for a sequel.
Nope.
No. She wraps up everything pretty tidily.
Yeah.
So the only way for anyone to write a sequel to Pride and Prejudice was for there to be a murder mystery.
I mean, to be fair, P.D. James did probably as good as anybody could.
I have not read it.
But yeah. It definitely was not intended to.
No. You have to make your own threads. Yes, I'm doing a concert on Saturday. 6. Oh, I think I'm gonna try. I might try for 5. I keep forgetting to like officially decide this, and it's already Thursday. Check out the video page, and I will make it. I don't know. I don't want to do it at 5. That seems way too early. But maybe I should actually do it a little bit later. Maybe that would be better. Because I have in the past done concerts at 7 or 8, and it was fine. But the last one I did was at 6, and the first time I did it at 6 on Saturday, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the time was a factor, but I'm going to change the time to see if it'll help. So I don't know. We will see.
That's an idea.
Oh my God. Again, I forgot to start the GarageBand recording.
Oh.
Twice in a row. I set it up. I tested the mic. I should just start immediately hitting record as soon as the mic is ready and not wait. Anyway, doesn't matter to any of you. I don't know if I'm even going to do anything with that audio. So, yes.
Fortunately, we have lots of audio of us talking afterward.
Yeah.
From previous sessions.
So, Saturday. I don't know if anybody has a preference for time on Saturday. I'm having a hard time deciding which way to go with it. So let me know, I guess. And on that note, goodbye. Bye.